My name is Daniel Reyes, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a project manager for a mid-sized logistics company, the kind of job that pays well enough but never lets you forget you earned every cent of it. I want to tell you about the night my entire family disappeared from my life in the span of about 90 seconds and what happened almost 2 years later that none of us saw coming. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always slow at work and I was sitting on my couch eating leftover rice when my phone buzzed with a message in the family group chat. My mother had started that chat years ago to share recipes and remind everyone about birthdays. That night, the message read differently. "We've all agreed it's healthier if you stop contacting us completely. We need distance from you." I read it twice, then a third time. I was still trying to make sense of the words when my phone buzzed again. A notification, then another, then another. I opened my contacts and saw it. Blocked by my mother. Blocked by my father. Blocked by my brother. Blocked by my sister. 4 people who shared my blood, my childhood, my last name, had erased me in the time it takes to microwave a cup of coffee. I sat there in my apartment, rice going cold in my lap, and I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat in silence, staring at a phone that no longer had a family attached to it, trying to figure out what I had done to deserve this. To understand how strange this was, you have to understand who I'd been to that family for as long as I could remember. I wasn't the golden child in the traditional sense. No trophies, no valedictorian speeches. I was the reliable one. The one people called when the roof leaked or the car broke down or the rent was short. When my parents fell behind on their mortgage payments 8 years ago, after my father's hours got cut at the plant, I was the one who quietly covered 3 months of payments without ever bringing it up again. When my younger brother Marcus needed help finishing his last 2 years of college because his part-time job wasn't enough, I paid for his books and half his tuition, and I never once asked him to pay me back. I told him to pass it forward someday. I drove my mother to her cardiology appointments every other month because my father got too anxious in hospitals, and my sister Priscilla always had something come up. I picked up extra shifts at work more times than I could count, not because I loved overtime, but because there was always something. A car repair, a medical bill, a favor someone needed that only money could solve. And every time, I said yes. Meanwhile, my siblings rarely lifted a finger. Marcus was always busy. Priscilla always had an excuse ready before you even finished asking. And my parents, instead of noticing the imbalance, simply got used to it. I became the family's safety net, the person you called when everything else had failed. Nobody ever said thank you in a way that felt like it mattered. It was just expected. Daniel will handle it. Daniel always handles it. I didn't resent it. Not really. I told myself that's what family does for each other. I told myself it would even out eventually. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. Looking back now, the warning signs had been there for months before that group text arrived. It started small. Phone calls that used to be answered on the second ring started going to voicemail. Text messages I sent got left on read for days. Then eventually got a short, distant reply, if any reply came at all. Invitations that used to come automatically, Sunday dinners, my niece's birthday party, my father's retirement gathering, simply stopped showing up in my inbox. Then came the holidays. Thanksgiving passed, and nobody called to ask what time I was coming. I called my mother to ask, and she gave a vague answer about keeping it small this year. A week later, I saw photos on social media. The whole family gathered around a table, laughing, my nieces and nephews in matching sweaters, a spread of food I recognized from childhood. I hadn't been invited. Nobody had told me. I confronted my mother gently over the phone, trying not to sound hurt, though I was. She sighed and said, "You're imagining things, Daniel. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is." My father, when I brought it up to him separately, said almost the exact same phrase, word for word, like they'd rehearsed it. "You're imagining things." I started to wonder if I really was. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was reading too much into busy schedules and bad timing. I began questioning my own perception of reality, replaying conversations in my head, searching for what I might have done wrong. I didn't find out the truth until much later, and when I did, it explained everything. My older cousin Elena, not a sibling, but close enough in age and history that she'd always felt like one, eventually told me what had been happening behind closed doors, long after the damage was done. It turned out that Priscilla, my sister, had spent the better part of a year quietly poisoning the well. She'd been telling relatives in hushed phone calls and private conversations that I had been stealing money from our parents, that I was manipulating our aging grandfather for his money. That every dollar I'd ever given, every ride to the hospital, every late-night phone call to help someone through a crisis had secretly been part of some long game to inherit money down the line. She told people I talked badly about the family behind their backs, that I called our mother pathetic and our father a burden. None of it was true, not one word. To make it believable, she'd taken old text messages, years-old jokes, sarcastic comments taken wildly out of context, screenshots edited just enough to change their meaning, and passed them around as proof. She was patient about it. She didn't dump it all at once. She planted a seed here, a doubt there, over the course of months, letting suspicion grow on its own until it didn't need her anymore. One relative told another, who told another, and by the time it reached my parents, it didn't sound like gossip anymore. It sounded like consensus. It sounded like truth. I didn't know any of this at the time. All I knew was that my family was slipping away from me, piece by piece, and every time I tried to hold on, my hands came back empty. After the group message, after the blocking, I tried everything I could think of to fix it. I called my parents from a different number, hoping they'd pick up before recognizing my voice. They didn't. I wrote long, honest letters, not angry ones, just honest ones, explaining that I didn't understand what had happened and asking them to please tell me what I had done. I mailed them to the house I grew up in. I never got a reply. I drove out to my parents' house one Sunday afternoon, sat in my car outside for 20 minutes, gathering the courage to knock, and when I finally did, no one answered, even though I could hear the television playing inside and see my father's car in the driveway. That was the moment it really sank in. This wasn't a misunderstanding that would blow over. This was a decision. My family had made a choice, and the choice was me being gone. I sat in my car outside that house for a long time after that, and I felt something I can only describe as complete aloneness. Not loneliness in the ordinary sense. I mean the specific, bottomless feeling of realizing that the people who were supposed to know you best, who were supposed to love you no matter what, had decided you weren't worth the effort of a conversation. I could have kept fighting. I could have shown up again and again begging for an explanation, wearing myself down, trying to prove my innocence to people who'd already made up their minds. Instead, I made a different choice. I decided to stop knocking on a door that wasn't going to open. Over the following months, I rebuilt my life from the ground up, without them. I applied for a position at a company 2 states away, one I'd been putting off pursuing because it would mean moving far from a family that I now realized had never really needed me to be close. They'd only needed me to be useful. I got the job. It paid better, the work was more fulfilling, and nobody there had a single preconceived idea about who I was supposed to be. I started seeing a therapist, something I'd always brushed off as unnecessary, and for the first time in my adult life, I had a space to say out loud how much it hurt without anyone telling me I was imagining things. Slowly, I built new relationships. Real ones. The kind where people checked in on me not because they needed something, but because they cared how my day went. I made friends at my new job who invited me to dinners for no reason other than wanting my company. I stopped waiting by the phone for a call that wasn't coming. I stopped auditioning for a family that had already recast the role. It took time, more time than I expected. But eventually, something I hadn't felt in years crept back into my life. Peace. Quiet, ordinary peace. Waking up without dread. Going a whole week without thinking about the group chat. It wasn't happiness exactly, not yet, but it was the foundation happiness gets built on. What I didn't know during any of this was that someone had been watching the whole situation unfold from a distance, quietly, carefully, and with far more attention than anyone realized. My grandfather, my father's father, was a man named Arthur. He'd built a modest logistics and distribution business from nothing back in the 70s, grown it over decades into something genuinely substantial, and by the time I was an adult, he was, by any measure, wealthy. He didn't act like it. He drove a car that was older than some of his grandchildren and wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation every winter. He didn't say much at family gatherings. He mostly sat back, listened, and watched. What none of us realized was just how closely he'd been watching, and for how long. After the family cut me off, my grandfather noticed my absence almost immediately. He asked my father where I was at the next gathering and got a vague, dismissive answer. He asked again a few weeks later, got a similar answer. Rather than accept it, Arthur, quietly without telling a single person, started looking into things himself. He requested old bank records, some of which took him weeks to track down through a private accountant he trusted. He found the mortgage payments I'd made for my parents years earlier, payments that had never been mentioned to him because my parents had been too embarrassed to admit they'd needed the help. He found the tuition payments for Marcus. He found records of hospital copays I'd covered for my mother that she'd never once brought up. He reached out to a few old family friends, gently without raising suspicion, and pieced together a version of events that looked nothing like the story that had been spreading through the family. And then he found the source. Through a conversation with Elena, who trusted him enough to be honest, he learned about the rumors Priscilla had been spreading. The doctored messages, the fabricated accusations, the slow poisoning of an entire family's perception of one person. He didn't confront her. He didn't tell my parents what he'd found. He simply absorbed the truth, quietly, and made a decision of his own. Without telling a single soul, my grandfather changed his will. Almost 2 years after that group text ended my relationship with my family, my grandfather passed away peacefully in his sleep. I found out through Elena, who still had my new number, and I made the trip back for the funeral. Not for the family, but because he deserved that much from me, regardless of everything. The funeral was exactly as awkward as you'd expect. My parents stood near the front, my siblings beside them, and me somewhere near the back, an outsider at a gathering for a man who had never treated me like one. A few relatives nodded at me stiffly. Most avoided eye contact entirely. Priscilla looked at me once, quickly, and looked away just as fast. A week later, the family lawyer called everyone together for the reading of the will. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to skip it entirely, to let them have whatever was coming without my presence complicating things further. But Elena convinced me to attend, insisting it mattered that I be there. I still don't think she fully knew what was coming, but she had a feeling. We sat in a lawyer's office that smelled like old paper and coffee. My parents on one side of the room, my siblings scattered around them, me near the door. The lawyer, an older man with reading glasses perched low on his nose, cleared his throat and began. He read through the standard language first, the modest personal keepsakes left to various relatives, a watch here, a set of tools there, small mementos with more sentimental value than financial. My parents nodded along, clearly expecting the substantial portion of the estate to be split evenly among the children, the way these things usually go. Then the lawyer paused, adjusted his glasses, and continued reading. The bulk of the estate, the company, the investment portfolio, the family home, had been left entirely to me. The room went completely silent. I watched my father's face shift from confusion to disbelief. My mother's hand went to her mouth. Priscilla's expression hardened into something I recognized instantly because I'd seen a flicker of it once or twice before, years ago, and never understood what it meant until now. The lawyer wasn't finished. He explained that my grandfather had left a letter to be read aloud, along with the will, and he unfolded it carefully before continuing. The only person who loved me without expecting anything in return was the one all of you abandoned, the lawyer read, in my grandfather's own words. He went on to explain in Arthur's voice that he had learned the truth, that he had investigated every accusation made against me and found every single one of them false, that he understood exactly who had spread those lies and why, and that he was leaving this decision as the clearest statement he could make without ever having to raise his voice about it while he was alive. Nobody said a word for a long moment. My mother was crying quietly. My father stared at the floor. Priscilla's face had gone pale, and around the room I could see the shift happening in real time. Cousins and aunts and uncles glancing at her, putting pieces together, remembering conversations they'd had with her over the past 2 years, recontextualizing every fact she'd once presented as certainty. In the weeks that followed, the consequences came quickly. Relatives who had once trusted Priscilla's version of events started asking her pointed questions she couldn't answer convincingly. Friends who had heard her stories secondhand began distancing themselves once the truth came out. My parents, for the first time, had to sit with the reality that they had cut off the one child who had spent years quietly holding their lives together based on a story that had never been true. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. Mostly I felt tired and a little sad, in a way that surprised me. It's a strange thing to be proven right by people who never believed you, especially when the person who proved it is no longer alive to see how it landed. About 2 weeks after the will was read, my phone started ringing. Missed calls from my mother, then my father, then even Marcus, who I hadn't spoken to directly in almost 2 years. Voicemails followed, some of them tearful, some of them stumbling over apologies that had clearly never been rehearsed before. Long emails arrived from my mother, explaining, justifying, asking for forgiveness. Nearly every message ended with some version of the same sentence. "We're family. Please come back." Part of me had spent 2 years wondering if I'd ever hear those words. Now that I had, I realized they didn't mean what I once thought they would. I thought about it for a few days before I replied. I didn't write anything long. I didn't need to anymore. When I needed my family, you asked for distance. I respected your wishes. Now I ask that you respect mine. I sent it once to the whole group, the same way they'd once sent theirs to me. Then, one by one, I blocked every number. These days, my life looks nothing like it did during that Tuesday night 2 years ago. I run the company my grandfather built with the same quiet, steady approach he always had. I have a small circle of people around me now, coworkers who became friends, friends who became something closer to family than blood ever managed to be, people who show up because they want to, not because I've paid for something or fixed something or bailed someone out. Some mornings, I walk into my office, look around at the people who chose to be in my life without needing a reason handed to them, and I think about how close I came to spending my whole life trying to earn a place at a table that was never going to make room for me. I don't think about my old family with anger anymore, most days. Mostly, I just think about how strange it is that the people who wanted distance from me the most were the ones who ended up needing me the most, and how the man who never said a word about it while he was alive ended up being the only one who ever truly saw me. I didn't get closure the way I once imagined I would. Not through an apology I actually believed. Not through a family dinner where everything went back to normal. I got it through walking away for good, on my own terms, and finally meaning it.